Chapter 5. Jonathan West. Every year, my wife, Sherry, and I made an effort to get out of town one way or another once the summer rolled around. Our trips were never anything extravagant, usually just heading one city over to visit some family or taking a short hike, but they were enough for the two of us. Life here was hard, and any excuse we had to get away from it all for a little bit was good enough for us. This year was no different. About a month back, we planned out this big hiking trip in a forest near town. We would hike along whatever path we could, taking in all the sights of nature, and then, when we were done, we'd set up camp for the night and just enjoy each other's company by the campfire. I remember how excited the two of us were when we finally made that drive. We were joking along with each other, Sherry excitedly pointing to everywhere she wanted to visit on this map that she brought along. All the while, the concrete pillars of Carpenter's Landing got smaller and smaller in our rear-view mirror. It was going to be perfect. At least, that's what we thought. By the time we arrived at the forest clearing, the sun was already setting. We'd left late in the day, wanting to spend our first night relaxing far from the polluted air and bright lights that poisoned our lives day by day. A quiet night in the wilderness, holding each other close as the warmth of the fire flickered calmly. We parked our car close to the forest entrance, unpacking what felt like hundreds of supplies for every situation. My wife is a worrier. She would usually plan ahead for every possible issue we'd come across, no matter how small. I wasn't exactly complaining about it, but it certainly made that first night far more exhausting than we'd ever planned. We lugged our gear along a dirt path left behind for hikers like ourselves, making an effort to avoid any branches or shrubbery that would make us topple over and drop everything along the forest floor. Even with the path we took, the forest was dense. Large oak trees surrounded us around every corner, with shrubs and other plant life huddled beneath them, making the forest a nightmare to navigate without a map on hand. Combine that with the darkness that was quickly overtaking the woods, and we could barely make out where we were going. Only reason we found the clearing we were looking for was because Sherry lit the way with this large flashlight she brought, making sure to guide me as I did most of the heavy lifting with our gear. When we got to the clearing, I immediately got to work setting up this cheap little tent we brought, while my wife gathered wood and set up a fire for us. As soon as both of us were done with our tedious tasks, we both collapsed by the fire and just laid there for a while. If the story ended here, then I would have remembered it as being a perfect night. Sure, the trek was difficult, but it was well worth it just to have those few short moments of quiet. Laying by the fire, staring up at the stars through the trees, holding the love of my life in my arms. But of course, it didn't stay that way for long. As the two of us laid there, enjoying the calm sounds of the fire, the silence was suddenly broken by a loud, shrill scream being heard deep within the forest. It was a single scream, sounded like a young man. It echoed out loudly before the woods returned to that same silence we grew accustomed to in an instant. I remember Sherry and I just stared at each other for a moment in shock, clearly trying to make heads or tails of what we'd just heard. And then Another scream shattered the quiet once more, this one sounding more strained and painful than before, until abruptly stopping just as quickly as it began. At this point, Sherry was freaking out in my arms, trembling and begging for us to leave. I tried to calm her down to no avail when we heard another sound, this one closer than the screams ever were. The sound of soft footsteps closing in on our campsite. I wasted no time ushering Sherry into the tent the moment I heard the sound. We had no idea what was out there, and I wasn't about to find out standing out in the open. We sat in that tent in near perfect silence, my wife shaking in my arms and me trying my hardest to keep both of us calm. The footsteps grew nearer and nearer until they were right outside our tent, and then they suddenly stopped. The fire outside illuminated the figure, casting its shadow over top the translucent tent and revealing to us what it was. A man. A tall man that looked to be wearing baggy clothes, now just standing outside the tent like a statue. I could hear him start mumbling something to himself out there, and his shadow began swaying back and forth. He stood out there for what felt like an eternity, whispering to nobody like he was in some kind of catatonic state. Eventually I had enough of it. I rummaged around in our tent for some kind of weapon, settling on a hunting knife we had brought. As I went to open the tent, Sherry grabbed at my shirt sleeve, mouthing the words, "No!" to me over and over, but I assured her I would be okay and slowly unzipped the tent to get a better look at the man outside. I peered my head out of the small entrance I created, just enough to be able to see him. He was facing away from our tent, staring deeply into the campfire as he continued his quiet rambling. He wore a large, baggy white hoodie and black cargo pants. The hoodie was filthy, covered in all kinds of dirt, grime, and, most strikingly, what looked like blood. This same blood could be seen running through his dark hair and all over his hands, which tightly clutched his shoulders as if he were cold. The light from the fire reflected off the bloodstains, creating a glare which told me it was fresh. My mind began to race with all the horrible implications of his appearance. What were those screams we heard? Did he kill someone before arriving here? Before I had long to think about it, I caught something the man said while transfixed by the fire. Something I could actually make out between the gibberish he was speaking in.
He said in his raspy, shrill voice. There's been a fire. Get Mom and Dad.
I had no idea what he was talking about, but hearing him speak properly was enough to snap me out of the confused state I was in and step out of the tent, now holding the hunting knife in my right hand for him to see. "Hey," I said to him sternly. "What the fuck do you want?" I tried to make myself as imposing as possible to this man, despite my fear. I puffed out my chest and spoke as confidently as I could, but even then, it was clear that the encounter had me shaken up. When he heard my words, his head suddenly snapped in my direction, making immediate eye contact with me. One look at his face was enough for all my fake bravado to shatter. He looked burnt. Badly burnt. His face was scarred and misshapen, with a large burn mark creeping up his cheek towards his left eye, which looked to be blind. At first glance, it looked like half of a large, painful smile. He was missing almost all of his hair on the left side of his head as well, with what was still there barely clinging to his scalp in small black patches. The other side of his face would have looked fine by comparison, if not for the blood that covered it almost completely. I stepped back at the sight of him, my heart sinking to my stomach and my breaths becoming sporadic. The moment he saw me, a flash of recognition suddenly appeared on his face, breaking him free from the strange trance he was in.
Is that you?
He asked me in an excited voice.
I can't believe you're here. I finally found you.
As he said those words to me, he opened his arms and began to slowly walk towards me, his hands and arms still dripping with that fresh, thick blood. I didn't know what he wanted or who he thought I was, but I wasn't having any of it. I took one step back and firmly planted my feet into the dirt, pointing the hunting knife at him as I shouted, "Get the hell away from me, you freak! You take one step closer and I'll kill you!" That time, I meant it. I was not about to let this guy get anywhere close to me or my wife, no matter how scared I was. The moment he heard those words, something about his demeanor changed. He looked shocked, his eyes going wide and bloodshot, and his arms slowly lowering.
"How could you say that to me?"
he whispered, tears beginning to roll down his face. That was when I saw him reach into his pocket and pull out an old box cutter covered in the same blood as his hands and sweater. He suddenly hunched forward and lunged at me faster than I ever could have expected from a man his size. He tackled me to the ground, raising the box cutter above his head and preparing to swing down at me. In that instant, I acted fast, stabbing him in the side of the torso with the hunting knife and kicking him off of me as he screamed in pain. He barreled backwards into the campfire, his hoodie catching on fire as he tried to regain his composure. I screamed for Sherry to run, and soon after, her and I were bolting through the dark forest together, tripping over branches and shrubbery, but continuing forward regardless. That moment, running through the dark of the woods, knowing that maniac may be trailing behind us, was the most scared I have ever been in my entire life. My mind was racing. My eyes darted in every direction, mistaking the shapes of the oak trees around us for the man. It felt like a miracle when we saw the moonlight piercing through the trees, revealing the forest exit to us. We got to our car, and I frantically rummaged through my pockets trying to get my hands on the keys. I constantly checked behind myself, making sure he didn't follow us. The man was nowhere to be seen. When I got my hands on the keys, I opened the doors to our car, and next thing you know, my wife and I floored it out of there. I remember that ride home so vividly. The sobbing, the arguing about what to do next, the questioning about who that man was and what he wanted. It was the worst night of my entire life. After we got home, I called the cops and reported the whole thing. I remember I was told that they'd check the forest out to try and find any bodies, but I don't think anything came of it. Ever since then, things have been different between my wife and I. I've tried to help her work through what we experienced, but she's become so paranoid ever since that she barely even wants to leave the house. It's gotten especially bad now that word has gotten out about the ghost stalker, or whatever else people are calling him. She's absolutely convinced the guy we saw that night and the killer you're looking for are the same guy. That's why I am here. I hope that by telling you this, maybe you'll be able to piece things together and catch him. I want that more than anything. For the victims. And so Sherry doesn't have to be afraid to leave the house anymore. I just want to see her happy again. As Jonathan finished giving his account, tears ran down his face and his head hung low. Norman glanced over at his partner, clearly unequipped to deal with this kind of situation. Samuel caught his glance, taking in a deep breath before saying, "Don't worry, Jonathan. We will catch him. No matter what. I promise you, we will." Jonathan lifted his head to look at Samuel, sniffling and saying, "Thank you," before standing up and getting ready to leave. "Will that be all? I gotta make sure I get home before Sherry starts to worry," he asked, pointing to the door. Samuel and Norman both nodded, and Jonathan left with newfound hope that the man who attacked him and his wife that night would be brought to justice.